Emancipatory Praxis and Conceptuality in Adorno by Werner Bonefeld. Before I start, I want to say why I'm reading this, because it's kind of interesting, since this was a little bit hard for me to track down. I did find it, but it's not collected on the internet like a lot of other Bonefeld things. I had to find it through a thing. And what it is I was just curious about Deleuze, and I was like, what are the main, I was reading things on, the main distinctions between Deleuze and Marx, basically, how some people have tried to combine them, how some have criticized them, and I found an interesting thread on the Deleuze subreddit about this, where a guy says, there's also a big tendency among critical theorists, especially those associated with neo-Zapatismo, to attack Deleuze. The book, Negativing Revolution, Adorno and Political Activism, that's what this is from, is an essay anthology with a lot of informative criticisms of Deleuze. Albert Bonnet's essay, Antagonism and Difference, focuses the most on Deleuze, and although the criticism doesn't work, in my opinion, they don't work in interesting ways. So it's not like this guy's like a Deleuzian. He probably is very skeptical of guy's criticism because he wants to be a Deleuzian, which is fine. People have different reasons for reading things. But this next line, threw me through a loop. I'm genuinely unsure how I, as a Deleuzian, will respond to Bonefeld's criticism, though. That's crazy. Because, listen, I love Bonefeld, okay? Bonefeld is, my guy, to be honest. Even though I don't... The only thing I really disagree with him on is I think he's a Luxemburgist, and I think that kind of relies on this false binary between, Lenin and Luxembourg. I think he clearly believes in that. I think they agreed actually a lot more. Now, I'm not one of those Leninists who think, Trotskyist types, though, who think they fully agreed. But I do think he agreed more than what Bonefeld believes. Anyways, so I tracked that down, and this is his essay. I'm excited for this. They, the adherents of dialectical materialism, did not challenge the ideas of humanity, liberty, justice as such, but merely denied the claim of our society and represented the realization of these ideas. Though they treated the ideologies as illusions, they still found them illusions of truth itself. This lent a conciliatory splendor, if not the existence, at least to its objective tendencies. Ideologies were unmasked as apologetic concealments, and were rarely conceived as powerful instruments, functioning in order to change a liberal competitive society into a system of immediate oppression. Above all, the leftist critics fail to notice that the ideas themselves, in their abstract form, are not merely images of truth that will later materialize, but that they are ailing themselves, afflicted with the same injury under which they are conceived and bound up with the world against they are set. Introduction. That's an Adorno quote. Introduction. In the context of war and terror, globalization and anti-globalization movements, a discussion of Adorno's conception of praxis might appear quaint. Here we have modern forms of barbarism and a movement of movements that demand an end to poverty and war. And there we have the theoretical Titian who despaired in the face of barbarism, who denounced 68 as a pseudo-movement. Nevertheless, Adorno's negative dialectics is important. It challenges us to think what it means to say no in the false totality of bourgeois society. The demand for unity of theory and practice does not entail a concession to the weakness of thought, nor does it give dispensation to a practice to engage in battle for the sake of battle, indifferent to social content. What sort of practices need to fight barbarism? Can this fight be reduced to this course of action against that outrage or vice versa? And who negates the social preconditions that constitute the possibility of this and that? Further, can barbarism be fought, say, in alliance with Islamofascists, who, repeating the paradigmatic fascist gesture, demand a capitalism without capitalism? Only a reified consciousness can declare that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Critical thought is not an expression of thought of social forces whose real interest pretends to represent in theoretical terms. Instead, it aims at these forces themselves, seeking their dissolution. In a quotation that opens this chapter, Adorno praises Georgy Lukács as the dialectician who asks how society can be changed by those who are its victims. I love Lukács. Adorno's endorsement is surprising. Lukács' Leninist conceptions of vanguard as a locus of revolutionary practice was anathema to Adorno. Well, that's not true, actually. Adorno has a writing called Towards a New Manifesto, where he where he identifies as wanting to do a purely Leninist manifesto. So Adorno was a Leninist. Additionally, Adorno's conception of, people get very weird about Adorno, and they think, his takes on the workers is this pure armchair pessimistic thing, when he's just saying what Lenin said, and, he just has the same take on the workers as Lenin. He's a Leninist. Bonefeld, I guess because he's a Luxembourgist, can't accept, but loves Adorno, can't accept that? I don't know. But anyways. For Adorno, Lukács was important because of his theory of reification. One could argue as indeed, reification is not unique to Lukács, though. Marx even talks about it. One could argue, as indeed Francia does, that Lukács' theory of reification provided Adorno and Horkheimer with a research program that led them to uncover reification in every aspect of social life, in distinction to Lukács' conception of the Vanguard Party as the locus of non-reified proletarian class consciousness. Adorno and Horkheimer retreat in the theory and argues that it was the locus that preserves the promise of a human world whose moment of realization had passed. Indeed, Adorno argued that the metamorphosis of labor power into a commodity has permeated men through and through and objectified each of their impulses as formally commensurable variations of the exchange relations. Social reproduction, he argues, is possible only on the condition that the living have been replaced by the dead. That is, every social activity is always already what Marx called the activity of character masks, or personifications of economic categories. Okay, when I said that earlier, that's basically what I was getting at. He seems to suggest that the reified world allows only reified activity, and that therefore, or it can be no such thing as emancipatory praxis. No, I don't think that's what he thinks. Although it was a time for practice that fights barbarism, such practice is impossible, since whatever one does it is false. Quoted Brockman. Yeah, I don't think... I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I really don't think Adorno believes whatever one does, it is false. Unless, maybe he means it polemically. Because it's the world, in the way, the world is false. I think if so, I think that's really what he means. I really don't think Adorno believes we should do nothing. In the end, everything is the same, but not quite. When the student occupies in the Institute of Social Research, Adorno called the police to have them removed by force, and he was right to. In my view, that's my comment. In my view, Johann Zignoli take on Adorno's action is opposite, with an A. As he put it, the Adorno who called in the police was already his successor. Hans-Jürgen Krau argues in similar vein. Both Agnoli and Krau liken his negative dialectics to the workings of a mole that burrows away underground and whose efforts thus prepares the insurrection at a time of its enforced retreat. Krau rightly points out that conceptuality is one of the most important elements of Adorno's negative dialectics. Better, it is key. What is the concept of the concept? Chris Arthur rightly commends Adorno for having understood that capitalism has a specific conceptuality, and therefore conceptuality holds sway in reality itself. Conceptual thinking is thus not external to reality in the sense that it requires validation by means of empirical corroboration. The presumption of such externality lies at the heart of traditional theory. Contrary to Calachino's suggestion, a Marxist-inspired realist epistemology does not alter tradition. It merely radicalizes traditional theory from the standpoint of traditional theory. That is to say, theory does not possess photographs of empirical world. In contrast to traditional theory, critical theory aims to penetrate reality. Thought aims at the thing itself. Adorno thus holds that the categories of bourgeois political economy are finite, transient products of finite and transient reality of capitalism. For him, a dialectics that deciphers the social constitution of things extinguishes the autarky of the concept, strips the blindfold from our eyes. That the concept is a concept even when dealing with things and being does not change the fact that on its part it is entwined with a non-conceptual whole. History does not make history. Man makes history. That's the thing. A lot of Marxists, including even Bordiga, believe in deterministic history. Marx doesn't. Marx does not. Marx says men make their own history, not as they please, but still, men make their own history. History does nothing, does not possess vast wealth, does not fight battles. It is man, rather, the real living man, who does all that, who does possess and fight. It is not history that uses man as a means to pursue its ends, as if it were a person apart. History is nothing but the activity of man pursuing its ends. If anything, historical materialism is the critique of things understood as dogmatic. It melts and dissolves all that appears solid. Adorno's negative dialectics is such historical materialism. Yes! Yes, this makes sense. Okay, Bourdieu equates historical materialism with dialectical materialism, which I think is correct to do, because otherwise it's just some random shit. Why not just say negative dialectics is also historical materialism? It's all the same thing, it's all Marxist dialectic. It penetrates reality and dissolves into dogmatic posture by turning towards the non-identical and the identical, and the non-conceptual and the conceptual. Especially in miserable times, it thus makes sense to look at Adorno's negative dialectics to see the mole at work, to appreciate his philosophical destruction and subversive cunning, and to ask about the non-conceptuality of human social practice in a world governed by things. The character develops aspects of Adorno's concept to concept in broad terms. The aim is not to regurgitate Adorno's argument, but to map it out. The conclusion returns to the difficulty of saying no. 1. Concepts are moments of the reality that requires their formation. All concepts refer to non-conceptualities. Adorno, 1973. The task of a critical social theory is to demystify rigidified, thing-like congealed relationships, rendering their immediacy transparent. For example, Marx writes that in The Money Fetish, a social relation, a definite relation between individuals, appears as a metal, a stone, as a purely physical external thing which can be found as such in nature, and which is indistinguishable in form from its natural existence. There is only one world, and that is the world of appearance. This world has to be deciphered to reveal its total social constitution in social relations. In the critical tradition, conceptualization, therefore, does not mean the expounding of meta-theories, which, by means of infinite regress, finish up akin to the doctrines of the invisible hand with deist conceptions of social existence, whether in their religious or secularized forms. The so-called logic of things. Instead, it grounds the existence of invisible principles in human social relations and argues that it is these that produce their own enslavement to the invisible, whether in its religious or secularized forms. Conceptuality does also not entail the explanation of one thing by reference to another. Such thought moves from one thing to another in an attempt to render its term coherent by means of external reference. The state is explained by reference to the economic, and the economic by reference to the state. Similarly, demand is explained by supply by demand. By means of vicious circularity, then, explanation becomes tautological. Further, conceptuality does not mean the discovery of natural laws. Like, for example, the natural tendency of man to barter, as Adam Smith alleged. That man has to eat says nothing about his mode of subsistence, and the social necessities that a mode of subsistence entails, the so-called social laws. To conceptualize means to bring the thing to its concept. Conceptuality has to do with the recognition of reality, not with the analysis of concepts. Concepts are required to recognize reality. Conceptualization goes beyond their immediate perception of reality in order to comprehend what is hidden in its immediacy or immediate appearance. What is appearance, an appearance of, and what appears in appearance? Concepts belong to reality and exist through reality. They do not live a life on their own, detached from reality. A concept that has no content is a concept of no thing. Conceptuality is thus the way in which reality is rendered concrete. It is our way of comprehending reality by means of thought and experience. It focuses on the experience of reality and thinks that from within reality, concepts are thus movements of a reality that requires their formation. And in the business of conceptual thinking, to subvert the critical subject by denouncing its deceitful publicity, according to which its thinghood is either self-constituted or a natural phenomena. It denounces by asking, what does this content, human social relations, take that form, the form of capital? This also means that thought's critical quality does not rest on the answer it gives, but on the question it asks. The comprehension of things is not the same as their definition qua identification, or indeed registration in the system governed by, for example, ideal types. Conceptual comprehension of a thing means to perceive its individual movement and the connection not with the other things, but in and through them. The thinking, by means of definition or identification, is quite able to say what something comes under, what it illustrates, exemplifies, or represents. It does not, however, say what it is. Thinking, as Adorno saw it, is essentially the negation of things in their immediacy, of something immediately perceptible. Conceptualization thus means to dissolve the immediate appearance of things in order to recognize the thing is now pregnant immediacy, a mediated immediacy. It melts what appeared at first hard and solid. Every act of conceptualization implies this effort. Conceptualization is an act of revolt against immediacy. It does not bow to things. It wants to know what they are, and what they are is within them. It does not pretend that the immediate appearance of things is unreal, nor does it simply negate the world of appearance as if there were no more than a veil that hides the real human beings in the social relations. Rather, it recognizes the existent for what it is, the human being itself in its social relations. That these social relations are reified does not make them less human, as if the reified world is a world apart. Reification is not something objectively given. It is a social product. That's very important to note, because it's kind of easy to mistakenly interpret Marx in a dualistic way. But one must remember, okay, Marx is a post-Hegelian. And that's what Hegel's doing. Hegel's trying to, bridge the gap between the phenomenal and noumenal world. Okay, and I believe he does this by, I'm not an expert on Hegel, by saying that the, quote-unquote, objective world is part of subjectivity. It has a subjecthood as well. It's part of human subjectivity to process it. And so in this way, we can know it. Now, someone who's studied Hegel for, 10 years is going to say this is the wrongest statement ever uttered, but that's how I understand it. However reified the world of things, it remains a human world. The immediacy of things is thus real as objective illusion. Conceptualization is required to decipher this illusion, that is, to reveal its social genesis or social constitution in human social practice. Conceptualization does not thus mean thinking about things, rather it means thinking out of things. If it were really about things, then conceptualization would be external to its subject matter, though it would be applied to something presupposed as a fact. Thought would thus relate to its world as a tool that can be applied to society like an instrument. The thing or reality is here presupposed as something external to thought, and vice versa, as if they really belong to different worlds. Thought that does not go into its object does not recognize its object. Instead, it hypothesizes its object, and by doing so, analyzes it as if. That is, by hypothesizing the objective world, it hypothesizes itself as a derivation of objects. Such thought is able to, by name and order things, but cannot recognize them. In its vulgar version, it operates in ethics akin to a cash register, indifferent to its own substance, eager to calculate. Thinking out of things aims at discovering their social constitution. For instance, does price of labor amount to a yellow logarithm? Or is $5 an hour just and fair? Whatever the fairness or unfairness of a $5 an hour wage, analytical thinking does not bring the thing to its concept. It presupposes the thing and describes it in analytical terms, but does not recognize it. Why has human social existence acquired the form of a commodity, and what laws of necessity exist in a society whose labor power is saleable? Do the interests of the sellers and buyers of labor power coincide? These questions suggest that reification is really just an epiphenomenon. What is reified and what is reification a reification of? Marx's critique of religion argues that God requires no explanation. This is not because God cannot be explained, but because the explanation of God rests on the comprehension of the social relations that bring God to the fore as an objective abstraction that controls and cows those same social relations from which it springs. Equally reified things do not require explanation by and of themselves. Their comprehension rests on the understanding of the social relations that exist in the mode of the object and disappear in the appearance of reality's objective character. What is it about the particular mode of a human practice that requires it to exist against itself in the mode of the object? The reductio ad hominem that for Adorno characterizes the critical intent of Marx's work does not entail the replacement of the object by the subject. It means the comprehension of the object as a mode of existence of the subject. Just as objectivity without the subject is nonsense, subjectivity without the object is nothing. Human practice is not only constitutive of the social world, human practice also constitutes man as a social being. Man is a social concept. Man is neither a biological fact, nor is society the result of instinct. Man is not made by God, nor is society regulated by a total social subject that governs social reproduction through invisible means. That's a great line. That's a great line. Let me bold that. In order to understand things, one has to be within them. Hegel's notion of the work of the concept entails an internal contradiction between the concept and thing, experience and substance. The concept, of course, does not work. We do. The work of the concept thus means to be led by thought without fear of where it might take us. The work of the concept means recognizing the interior life of the thinghood of society, to engage in its contradictions, and thus to understand not only the necessity of its movement, but also its capacity. What belongs to the constituted conceptuality of, say, the state? What is it capable of? What lies within its concept? Revealing the constituted conceptuality of things entails discovery of their internal life. By the way, this is what I was saying earlier about dualism. It entails understanding the necessity of their mode of motion, capacity and power, means and ends. Conceptualization thus means articulating what is active in things, revealing their contradictory and constitution of movement, and comprehending the violence that is hidden and sustains the civilized appearance of equal and fair exchange relations. This, however, also means that conceptualization, the work of the concept, works against its own tendency. Its critical intent is to demystify the fetish. However, the conceptualize means to identify. Identification does not crush the fetish, it affirms it. Conceptualization is thus itself contradictory. It has to think against itself in order to bring the thing to its concept. The concept cannot encompass the thing. It has to be more than the thing, and the more also to be within the thing. If the thing and concept were to coincide, a critical theory of society would be superfluous. In short, the conceptualization of things entails in recognizing their contradictory existence. 2. All social life is essentially practical. This is from Marx's 8th Feuerbach thesis, includes thinking. Thinking is part of social life, and all social life is essentially practical. The thesis continues, all mysteries which lead theory to mysticism find their rational explanation in human practice, and in the comprehension of this practice. The thesis is clear, at the same time, most difficult. Thought is able to reveal reality qua demystification, and demystification depends on the comprehension of human practice. Human practice is thus deemed essential, and thought's purpose is a subversive one. It reveals the hidden essence of things in human practice. The difficult aspect of this is, like the reality through which it exists, thought can reinforce the mysticism against which it ostensibly, as thought, operates. For thought to be thought, it needs to comprehend human practice. Its comprehension demystifies. And here, the difficulties start. What human practice has in mind, how can it be revealed and where it might be found? The appearance of human practice in the world as we know it does not show the human practice whose comprehension alone is said to explain the appearance of the world. If it were, there would be no need for demystification, as essence and appearance would coincide. Marx's thesis suggests that human practice needs to be discovered by thought in order to comprehend the mysticism of its own appearance in forms that deny it. In short, the comprehension of human practice demystifies, but human practice is not immediately given in its appearance. What sort of human practice do we have to comprehend for demystification to occur in a valid sense? Can its validity be tested by means of verification or falsification? Or is it a different test is required? Is it valid on the condition that it's true in practice as a conceptuality that holds sway in reality itself? What does it mean to say that something is true in practice, which practice is the valid one? And this is in a society where the living have been replaced by the dead, and where the denial of all will to live is the condition of existence. The problem analyzed here is well focused by Helmut Reichelt. Expounding on Marx's critique of fetishism, human social relations appear contradictory as relations between things, and this appearance is real. He argues that capitalist exchange relations suggest that rationally acting subjects meet freely in the marketplace to realize their rational interests, whereas in fact they act as executives of abstract social laws, which they themselves have generated historically and reproduced through their rational behavior, and over which they have no control. In this context, Marx speaks of man as a personification of economic category, a real abstraction of sensuous activity, an activity that vanishes in its own social world and appears as a mere derivative of logical things. Man is ruled by abstractions, yet receives from them only what he has put into them. The circumstance that subjective rational behavior subsists through a context of objective irrationality that is beyond the control of human reason is often taken to mean that human social practice moves within an objective framework of apparently extra-mundane structures. These structures are thus not seen as inverted and perverted forms of human practice. Rather, they are posited as the objective framework within which human actions unfold. It is their objective laws of development that structure the behavior and actions of social groups. Human action thus derives from presupposed structures, takes place with them, and actualizes their objective force in concrete settings. This view is widely shared, from Hayek's praise of the logic of the market as the best framework for the pursuit of individual autonomy, to Althusser's theory of the unintended consequences of class struggle, and Habermas's dualistic differentiation of reality into life, world, and system. If, as Marx claims, the comprehension of human practice reality is the key to the comprehension of social existence, can this same human practice be derived from those things whose comprehension is said to depend on the understanding of human practice? Instead of being demystified, the world of things would be affirmed in every conceivable way. The mythological idea of fate becomes no less mythical when it is demythologized into a secular logic of things, that's a good one, or into a system logic that constantly threatens the colonization of the life world. This is why structural Marxism is dumb. The derivation of human social practice from presupposed, that is, from hypothesized social structures, accepts what the critical tradition sets out to subvert, qua demystification. It accepts commodity fetishism as something that is both immediately valid and beyond comprehension, and seeks demystification not by the comprehending human practice in its form of appearance, but by deriving human practice from presupposed social structures. All these Hegel PFP people on Discord are just social fascists. By hypothesizing the constituted world of things as an already existing and given anatomy of objective framework of action, the understanding that society has to do with human beings in their social relations is cut short by the notion that human beings is a merely derivative of things. What then is the social practice that Marx has in mind when he argues that its comprehension demystifies the social world? Surely it cannot be the action of economic categories and attendant human agents. It cannot be the action of a human subject that operates as it has to, as a personification or character mask of those same categories. The much praised dialectics between structure and agency is not helpful. It presupposes what it sets out to explain. It presupposes human practice in the form of an object, and supposes the object as an active extra-mundane thing. The dialectics of structure and agency give dialectics a bad name. It depends on dogmatic immediacies and moves in vicious circles as it hops from structure to agency and back again from agency to structure. Yeah, that's why dialectics is a terrible name, yeah. It's 90% of Marxists don't even know what it is, straight up, or think it's some whatever nonsense Mao wrote down. Like, every video on it, it's just like some shit about how it's when seeds grow, because Engels used this as a metaphor once. And instead of comprehending what they are, each is presupposed in the tautological movement of thought. None is explained. Marx's thesis that the understanding of the world of things has to comprehend human practice implies that this practice is constitutive. However, this formulation is full of dangers too. It presupposes a definite resolution to the stated problem. If social practice constitutes, it is supralungic, to be primitive or original. If it constitutes, does it remain external to its creation? Can it remain innocent in the perverted world it has created? That's from Negri, actually. Says the capital is a bewitching force whose power is such that the constituted subject is, as it were, sucked in the capital. The constituted subject is merely an alleged subject. The real power, it seems, is not the constitutive, but the constituted subject. Better, the mythical subject. Concepts do indeed live a dangerous life, as Debord puts it, in a world which really is topsy-turvy. The true is the moment of the false. Truth appears thus to exist in a mode of being denied, and existing untruth, yet it is true all the same. Okay, so to condense this down a bit, so concepts are moments of the reality that require their formation, and all concepts refer to non-conceptualities. Concepts come from reality, not outside it, but the reality always exceeds them. And this is what non-identity is. Conceptualization is an act of revolt against immediacy. Thought is negative and breaks appearance. It cannot affirm or describe reality, but undo it as such. The biggest error in treating capitalism as governed by objective structures or systems independent of human practice, the mythological idea of fate becomes no less mythical when it is demythologized into a secular logic of things. Instead of being demystified, the world of things is affirmed. The understanding society has to do with human beings and their social relations is cut short to the notion that human beings is a mere derivation of things. Essence must appear, and appearance must be the appearance of essence, but essence vanishes into appearance. Alright? Section 3. All science would be superfluous if the outward appearance of things and the essence of things directly coincided. That's an amazing line from Marx. Nor do essence and appearance coincide directly or belong to distinct realities. As Marx put it in an earlier work, the separation between in itself and for itself, the substance of the subject, is abstract mysticism. In contrast, then, to the traditional acceptance of social theory is either a theory of structures or social action. The conceptualization of things amounts to a process of deciphering their essence. But the essence of things can only be human practice in the mode of the object. Better, in the mode of being denied, essence must appear. If it does not, then it is not essence. Conversely, appearance must be the appearance of essence, or it is nothing. There is only one reality, a reality of disunion and contradiction, fissure and antagonism, and thus a reality where subject and object are inverted in a topsy-turvy way. At the same time, the essence and appearance exist within the things by means of an irreconcilable, antagonistic, restless unity. This unity subsists against itself in the form of unity. This unity in the form of unity entails coercion of the condition of unity, a coerced and coercive unity. The bourgeois relations of abstract equality render difference commensurable in the form of an abstract identity, where everything is indifferent to its social content as mere variations of exchange relations. Abstract identity is indifferent to human distinctiveness. It is an identity of death. Difference exists in the form of unity. That is, difference is coerced to appear indifferent to itself in the form of value, the actual mask of death. This unity in the form of unity entails a social reality that is not reconciled with itself and whose concept is not at peace with itself. For this reality to be conceived conceptually, antagonism has to be a moment of the concept itself, a concept torn by contradiction and an antagonistic battle. It is within the concept of its internality and immanence that the non-coincidence of essence and appearance exists in the form of unity. This non-coincidence strains the concept, forcing it to operate against itself. Essence and appearance thus form an interconnection of an antagonistic kind. Already the simple form of exchange value in money latently contain the opposite between labor and capital. Antagonism is, however, not only a relationship of battle, it is also a relationship of mutual dependence of social unity. Thus, the concept of reality is divided within itself. Mutual dependency exists qua antagonism, and unity exists qua disunity. Its content is suppressed in its form. These deny their substance, and yet contain within themselves what they deny. That is, the antagonistic struggle that threatens to force reality apart, beyond itself. And yet the concept is not one of antagonism, but of unity. It is as if its revolutionary march into the world is forced underground in order for the concept to retain its air of civilized normality and bourgeois respectability. Hegel's notion that essence has to appear does not mean the human subject makes an appearance by asserting itself against the world of things, say in terms of a conception of class struggle as a force that's from the outside, breaks into the capital relation during periods of crisis. Hegel's notion that essence has to appear means that essence cannot choose not to appear. It is forced to appear. It is as if essence is coerced to appear in its own inhospitable world. That's what makes essence essential, subsists in appearance. Its appearance is thus at the same time its disappearance. It is forced to appear, and the necessity of its appearance entails that it vanishes. Essence vanishes in its appearance. The law of essence is its disappearance qua appearance, in the enchanted and perverted world of capital. Essence appears in the form of a denial as a thing. The circumstance that essence disappears in its appearance is as real as the fact that, on the other hand, there would be nothing without individuals and their spontaneities. Reification, then, finds its limitation in reified man. The reality in which social individual moves day in and day out has no invariant character. That is something which exists independently from man. Horkheimer's characterization of Marx's critique of political economy as a judgment on existence expresses the same fundamental idea, that is, capitalist social relations render the human being invisible. Yet, however invisible, the world of things has no independent existence from human social practice. In its entirety, it is a world of human practice, and thus a human world. For the critical tradition, the critique of political economy amounts, therefore, to a conceptualized praxis, that is, an understanding of the totality of human social practice, which constitutes and contradicts the world of capital. In short, the contradiction of the world occurs behind the backs of the individuals, yet it is their work. That's from Marcuse. Human practice, in sum, exists in appearance, and does so in the mode of being denied. The conceptuality of things obtains through which they deny, that is, essence passages into which lies concept sealed beneath the facade of immediacy and of the supposed facts which makes the facts that they are. And that which is hidden in facts gives them their meaning. The positivity of facts is deceitful. It hides what they are and what confronts them with what they are. The positivity becomes comprehensible and for this reason dissolves, but not without a fight. Truth has not harmed anyone except the messenger. The circumstance that the appearance of things hides their genesis in human practice entails a program of critique that deciphers the puzzling forms of value as forms assumed by social relations between man and man, and reveals their social constitution and the peculiar social character of labor that becomes productive only by producing its opposite, that is, capital. That is, essence appears at the same time as it's hidden in its appearance. Critiques enlightening intent to make visible what is hidden in things, it comprehends essence in its appearance, that is, as disappeared essence. Adorno captures this appearance qua disappearance when he argues that essence is first of all the fatal mischief of the world that degrades men to means of real abstraction that rules over them. Essence exists in the mode of being denied as mischief. That is to say, sensuous human practice subsists against itself in the form of, say, freedom as wage slavery. Neither are structures external to human practice, nor is human practice external to social structures. Man is a social being, and therewith a being qua objectification. Man is always objectified man. The issue that reification or alienation or neat fetishism brings to the fore is not objectification, but its alienated or reified mode. Therefore, the immediacy of the objective world is not really an immediacy of things. It is the immediacy of things in the mode of an objective illusion. The subject's objectification exists in inverted form, where the thing subjectifies itself in the person, and the person objectifies himself in the thing. That is to say, the apparent immediacy of the objective world is in fact always already a mediated whole. Mediation does not entail an external relationship between subject and object. Mediation is not the point of collision between subject and other. Nor is mediation the middle point between two extremes, or a point of reconciling between subject and object. Mediation means mediation of subject and object in their topsy-turvy movement, where both exist qua the other, where both are identical with the other, and where identity exists only against itself as contradiction and disunity. That is, non-identity. Every category is at the same time a denied category. Mediation thus means that the world of things is the mode of existence of the subject that exists qua things in the mode of being denied. There is thus a continuing change of form between object and subject, where both are inverted forms of social reality that render man and his social relations invisible, the perverted form of value. In other words, presents the mode of existence of human purposeful activity in the form of impersonal relations, including wage labor and capital. Capital finds its conceptuality in labor and in denial of this labor. It posits itself as the restless expansion of wealth only on the condition that it maintains its relationship to labor at the same time as it goes beyond labor. It is movement of restless positing qua destruction. Concealed in the concept of capital as self-valorizing value lies the conceptuality of social labor. The necessity of its affirmation qua destruction, discussed by Marx at times as the dialectic between the forms and relations of production, belonging to the constitution to the existence of social labor in the form of capital. Destruction is the constituted nightmare of the capitalist mode of social reproduction. Society suddenly finds itself put back into a state of momentary barbarism. It appears as if a famine, a universal war devastated, had cut off the supply of every means of subsistence. Industry and commerce seem to be destroyed. And why? Because there's too much civilization, too much means of subsistence, too much industry, too much commerce. The productive forces at the disposal of society no longer tend to further the development of the conditions of bourgeois property. On the contrary, they have become too powerful for these conditions, by which they're fettered and so on as they overcome these fetters. They bring disorder into the whole of bourgeois society, endanger the existence of bourgeois property. The conditions of bourgeois society are too narrow to comprise the wealth created by them. And how does bourgeois society get over these crises? On the other one hand, they enforce destruction of a mass of productive forces. On the other, by the conquest of new markets, and by more thorough exploitation of old ones. That's from Marx and Engels. This commentary on globalization by the 29-year-old Marx is not a brilliant anticipation, which after all turned out to be far too optimistic. Rather, it conceptualizes the critical subject, and in doing so, shows what lies within it. What lies within concepts are its determinate necessities. These belong to the critical subject and that constitutes its conceptuality. Creation qua destruction is a valid necessity of capitalist social relations. It belongs to the conceptuality. Conceptuality expresses the fact that no matter how much blame may attach to the subject's contribution, the conceived world is not its own, but a world hostile to the subject. Man vanishes in her own world and exists against herself as a personification of economic categories, an alienated subject that constitutes the world of things and is invisible, lost and denied in its own world. In sum, the meaning of objectivity excludes the possibility that it can also be a subject. However, to be an object is part of the meaning of subjectivity. Subjectivity means objectification in its capitalist form appears in the logic of things. Appearance is the enchantment of the subject in its own world. The circumstance that objectification exists as alienation thus does not imply that there is an as yet undiscovered and indeed undiscoverable logic that lies solely within the thing itself. Only as a social determinate object can the object be an object. Reason exists, but in an irrational form. The irrational world is a rational world. 4. The circumstance that human beings enter into relationships with one another as personifications of things says that the subject vanishes into the mode of its appearance. Thus, the demand that thought is adequate to its subject matter entails more than it bargains for. Its adequacy cannot be established by means of falsification or verification. There is no verifiable it is. To say that something is already cast out upon the proclaimed identification to the it, brings things to their concept, requires that the concepts are open to the experience of the thing. The freedom of the wage contract challenges the concept of freedom in its experience. Dialectics opens concepts. Dialectics is not a formal procedure or method applied to reality. Instead, it focuses on social content and does so by moving within their social forms. Dialectics is an immanent in its social context. It knows that there is no second reality. Dialectics does not practice self-deception by pretending that appearance is a distinct form is distinct from essence, as if reality comprises the interplay between structural laws and the development of the social action of human agents. Dialectics is also not a self-perpetuating triad where the thesis confronts its antitheses, reconciled by means of synthesis, only for synthesis to result in a new thesis. Dialectics concretizes reality by means of determinate negation. Dialectics thinks this united unity of things moves within reality's contradictory constitution and deciphers the reality of things by revealing human practice as the form-giving fire of things. Dialectics has no more to begin with than that objects do not go into their concepts without leaving remainder. Dialectics is thus a sort of cogitative confrontation of concept and thing. As the disappeared essence of things, human practice is the non-conceptual content of things. Confronting the thing means deciphering the non-conceptual and the act of conceptualizing it. For example, the conceptuality of the wage labor as a personification of variable capital confronts what it denies, human sensuous being, and its non-conceptuality belongs to the concept wage labor and therefore haunts and contradicts it. Sensuous being exists within the concept of variable capital and the mode of being denied. Further, for variable capital to function, it requires the ingenuity and spontaneity of human purposeful practice. Yet this too is denied in its posited concept. That what is denied in the concept has no separate existence from the concept. It lives not only within and through the concept, but also against it. Dialectics is thus not a form of thought and that pacifies the contradiction, be it by means of reconciliation, integration, incorporation, a simplistic, formalistic indifference to social contents. Dialectics recognizes the non-conceptual in the concept and so illuminates the contradiction, follows its movement, and reveals the secrets of its perverted mode of existence. Demythologizing is dialectics' enlightening intent. That's beautifully put. Adorno's notion that dialectics is the consistent sense of non-identity does not report on something that is external to things. It is an internal non-identity. Better, it is non-identity through identity. To think dialectically means to think in contradictions, for the sake of the contradiction once experienced in things and against that contradiction. What appears identical in exchange is non-identity under the aspect of identity. Although no atom of matter goes into the determination of value, use value constitutes the substance of all wealth. Whatever social form of that wealth, non-identity is immanent in identity. Its recognition makes dialectics negative. Negative dialectics is suspicious of all identity and hinges on this turn towards non-identity within the concept. Althusser was right to argue that man does not exist. In the topsy-turvy world of capital, man is indeed a non-conceptuality. However, does it therefore follow that the critique of political economy is really no more than the secularized methodology of things? Pace Althusser's idea that capital contradicts itself in the form of social structures it is. What is that? Something brushed my leg. Man, who as a single individual, as a group, or as a mess, understands himself as subject and who can defend himself against a merely objective existence. In politics, in religion, and philosophy, one can say that subversion is a truly human phenomenon. Man objects to be a mere football of the Almighty. Here he is mere object. Similarly, as a servant of the master, he is mere object, regardless of whether we conceive this in social or religious terms. Man is never at the center of politics, at the political party say, but he is a means of politics, and an object he remains most of all when he is kept in a state of ignorance. Subversion operates against systems of thought, against political and economic systems that threaten nature, and therewith always also man. In other words, the non-conceptual is the negative force of the concept. Reality develops by force of its negation. Thus, variable capital does not go on strike. Humans do. and they do so at the same time that they really exist as personifications of variable capital. Fetishism is real, but its concept contains more than it reveals. That what is not identical to the concept drives the concept. There is no secret reality beyond its concept, nor is there an external vantage point from which to launch the assault. Reality is divided within itself. The resolution to the dialectical context of immanence is the context itself. The whole is false, thus the whole has to go. In conclusion, the constitutive character of the non-conceptual in the concept entails the recognition of reality by means of determinate negation. Determinate negation entails the deciphering of things as the relations between humans. The foundation of human existence can only be man herself. Critique then has to decipher the world of things on a human basis, and does so by showing that the forms of capital are constituted by and subsist through the social practice of active humanity. Their conceptualization as forms of social relations does not entail man as an abstract individual, but as a member of a definite form of society. Determinate critique seeks to decipher the human content of reified things, and thus to recognize man in his social relations. It resists suppression of this human content, and instead of deriving human practice from presupposed hypothesized things, it recognizes these things as forms of human practice, however perverted this practice might be in form of the object. Conclusion. Adorno's negative dialectics detests reconciliation with negative conditions. The idea that negation of the negation is positive makes no sense. This idea can only be upheld by one who presupposes positivity. Refusal to sanction things as they are entails irreconcilability. The negation of negation does not negate what it has negated. It negates the negative human condition, a condition governed by things. In short, what is negation is negative until it is past. What is false is false. The whole is false. The whole has to go. If, however, the whole is false, then whatever one does is false. Irreconcilability of negative dialectics with negative conditions appears thus to render impotent its practical dimension. Adorno's concept of the concept is emphatically practical. It holds that however much the form of human practice have autonomized themselves from the individual, they remain forms of human practice. Reichelt expresses this well when he argues that human sensuous practice subsists through its supersensible existence in the autonomization of society as both the object and subject of its perverted social practice. Within economic categories, the human subject is a mere metaphysical nuisance. Adorno's critique shows that this nuisance is in fact the essence of things. His concept of concepts is thus distinct. According to Lukács, the worker can resist reification because as long as he rebels against it consciously, his humanity and soul are not changed into commodities. That the soul of the worker in resistance is the party is of no interest here. What is important, however, is that reification does not affect the soul of the worker, as if the soul is not of this world, but of divine issue. Lukács' position is a paradox. He derives the revolutionary subject, he calls it the totality of the proletarian subject represented by the party, from something that is and remains external to its reified existence. Bloch conceived of the unreified within reification as the inner transcendence of matter, and Negt and Kluge conceived it as materialist instincts. In Adorno, he would have none of this. The very idea that there is a world out there that has not been colonized by the logic of things is nonsensical. Instead of a concept of society, their differentiation society into a system and soul of transcendent matter or materialist instinct separates what belongs together. Indeed, whichever formulation is favored, they all insist on a subject that is conceived in the contradistinction to society. The insisted subject is not a social subject, it is an asserted subject. It is meant to do what the antagonistic society is no longer assumed to be able to do. That is, realize the social subject in battle against its own perverted mode of existence. Leaving aside Adorno's despair, he allows himself to hope only on the condition that all hope has disappeared, and his conception of bourgeois society does not allow for externalities. There is only one world. Human practice ensues in and through perverted social forms. Like Marx, Adorno's work mocks those who depict socialism as the realization of the ideas of bourgeois society. That's really interesting because Chris Catrone specifically describes it as that many times. And at least this is Adorno's view. That's interesting. As Marx put it, honestly, I think that guy's kind of a hack, to be honest, because it's like, every time he says something that to me seems mind-blowing, as soon as I learn about it, I'm like, oh, he's just talking nonsense. Like, is he actually just a genuine fraud? It's kind of crazy, if so. But it's so far a 100% ratio on everything he's saying being wrong. As Marx put it, what divides these gentlemen from the bourgeois apologist is on the other side, their sensitivity to the contradictions included in the system. On the other, the utopian inability to grasp the necessary difference between the real and ideal form of bourgeois society, which is the cause of their desire to undertake the superfluous business of realizing the ideal expression again, which is in fact only the inverted projection of this reality. Or, in Adorno's words, the whole is false. Since, however, the whole is false, everything is false. That is, a wrong life cannot be lived rightly. Adorno's conception of bourgeois society does indeed force us to think about what it means to say no in a negative world. To say no to something is simple, but to say no is difficult. For one, the no is external to, but operates within society's false totality. Like Marx's summons of class struggle as the motor of history, the no drives the negative world forward. It is its dynamic force. Furthermore, to say what the no is comprises the no insofar as it becomes positive in its affirmative, yet to something that has no valid content except the false totality of bourgeois society itself. The no is immanent to the false society. It belongs to its concept. Horkheimer's statement, "I can say what is wrong, but I cannot say what is right," is thus apt. The no not only drives the negative world forward, it also posits uncertainty. Adorno's negative dialectics ponders the practical dimension of this uncertainty, cannot accept it, and rejects it as pseudo-activity. The collapse of working-class politics in the face of fascism and Nazism has left a permanent imprint. Adorno's conception of bourgeois society entails the experience of the concept. The experience of the concept is Auschwitz. In conclusion, Adorno's negative dialectics has to be studied, especially in miserable times. Its courageous delivery of the concept of bourgeois society operates like the proverbial mole, which, according to Marx, prepares for the revolution by tunneling through the defenses. The mole is a philosophical mole. Once its work is done, the mole departs. Its departure demands that Adorno's confrontation with the concept of reality, of experience, be brought down to the real-life activity of the unhappy consciousness in the struggle. Man's existence as an economic category does not entail reduction of consciousness to economic consciousness. It entails the concept of economic activity as an experience concept, an economic consciousness of an expression of consciousness. At the very least, economic consciousness is an unhappy consciousness. It is this consciousness that demands reconciliation. Freedom turns concrete into the changing form of repression as resistance to repression. There has been as much free will as there were men that will be as there were men with the will to be free. That is to say, Adorno's statement that one cannot live honestly in the false totality of bourgeois society is only partially correct. An honest life begins again in the struggle against the falsehood of bourgeois society. In distinction to Adorno, then, who's claimed to want freedom, but refrain from struggling against bourgeois society, society contradicts themselves. Alright, just to tie it all together now. So, essence must appear, and appearance must be the appearance of essence, but essence vanishes in its appearance. Human social practice is the essence, and capital is the appearance. This appearance is a real inversion, so reality itself is a human practice appearing as something that negates it. The very idea that there could be a world out there that has not yet been colonized by the logic of things is nonsensical. The constituted subject is merely an alleged subject. The real power is the constituted subject. The subject is already reified and constituted by capital, not something outside it, and there is no outside of capital where pure difference operates. The dialectical concretizes reality by means of a determining negation. To think dialectically means to think in contradictions and against that contradiction. Without negation, you cannot grasp capitalism. Why is this? Because the whole is the false and the whole has to go. Without contradiction, you inevitably misrecognize capitalism, exploitation becomes production, and domination becomes flows, and antagonism becomes difference. In a world built on human activity existing as its own negation, only negative dialectics can understand it.